So, well, it's such a joy and privilege to be here today. I'm a bona fide home educating mother. Often Simon's off on a Saturday and I'm at home scraping Weetabix out of bowls and finding things under the sofa and generally keeping a bit of order. So just please bear with me if I have to catch my breath. So I'm going to begin by reading from Ephesians chapter 6, and it's a familiar passage about the armour of God, and I just want to pull something out. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armour of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armour of God, that you may be able to withstand on the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Stand therefore, having fastened on the belt of truth, and having put on the breastplate of righteousness." And then the passage continues, and it's probably a familiar one to us, talking about the armour of God. And Paul uses the analogy of a soldier to describe the Christian. And in those verses, I don't know if you noticed, it says 4 times to stand, to withstand, stand firm, stand therefore. And William Gurnall, who wrote a book which I'm reading all the time called The Christian in Complete Armour, says that to stand implies proper rank, order, and station for each Christian, as opposed to disorder. And it should be the concern of every Christian to stand in order in his assigned place. And I think there's a real temptation for Christian women today to abandon station, to break rank, and to assume somebody else's role. And it's no wonder that we're so quick to feel overwhelmed. So I'm talking about how not to feel overwhelmed. So if you think about a soldier, every soldier has a rank and a station, and to stand in place means not to usurp somebody else's place, not to take somebody else's role on. And order presupposes company. So a soldier doesn't march by himself. He's got people in front of him, behind him, and to either side. And I think, particularly thinking about our roles as home educating mothers, the people we need to stand in rank amongst are those in our churches and also in our families. So I'm going to begin by just talking about standing in rank in our churches and in our families. And the reason I want to do this is because when you build a house, you don't begin with the finishing touches. You don't begin with the hanging baskets and the front doormat. You begin by putting the foundations in place. And once we've got the foundations in place, then quite a lot of the rest of the work takes care of itself. So let's begin by standing in rank in our churches. Okay, so I just want to take a step back a second and just talk about church attendance. Now, the New Testament assumes that believers in Christ are members or are attending local churches. And it says in Acts 2, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayers. And it says in Hebrews 10, let's consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as some are in the habit of doing. And if you think about it, as you read the New Testament, baptism, the Lord's Supper, discipline of wayward believers, sending of missionaries, caring for widows, these all take place within the context of a local church. And there is no exception verse in the Bible. And the reason I just want to focus on this point for a few minutes is very often I meet home educating families who've decided to basically cut themselves off from the local church. And I'm not talking, and they say they're doing church at home. And I'm not talking about during lockdown when perhaps we didn't have much of a choice. But now things are back to normal. They've been back to normal for 2 years. And just often families don't really seem to have any intention of being part of a local church. But I just want to encourage you that the Bible really assumes that if we love Christ and if we're one of his children, we need to be worshipping with other members of his body. And I realise there are a spectrum of churches. If you think about home education, there are some churches that are very supportive of home education, some that are perhaps a bit ambivalent, and some that are really unsupportive of home education. And again, doctrinally, you've got churches that are doctrinally strong, some that are quite weak, and then even apostate churches But I think there is a really good precedent in the New Testament for attending a church, even if your only choice isn't a great church. And I'm going to show you where I get this from. They're having a good time. Lovely. If you go to Revelation, I'll just read some verses to you. And there's a letter written to 7 different churches, and it's the words of Christ. And if you look at the churches, there's a spectrum between the churches that are faithful to the Lord and some that are really quite unfaithful. But in every single church, there are some believers there. So, just to give a few examples, the church of Pergamum, Jesus says, some hold to the teachings of Balaam and the Nicolaitans, who are a heretical group, yet you hold fast to my name. So he's speaking to some believers in that church who are still being faithful to the Lord. Then if you look at Thyatira, it says, there are some that tolerate Jezebel, a prophetess who taught sexual immorality, but to the rest of you in Thyatira who do not hold to this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, hold fast what you have until I come. And to the church in Sardis, it says, you've got a reputation for being alive, but you are dead, yet you still have a few names in Sardis, people who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. And see, there's a pattern of believers there, and I think the reason was there was only probably one church in the city, there was only one place for them to go. And, I just want to encourage us today, let's begin at the beginning. If we're home educating Christian mothers, if we want to raise our children in the Lord, let's make sure we're in a church and we're members of a church, even if it might not be your dream church, okay? So, standing in rank, let's think about serving in our churches first. And I know there's probably a temptation. We might feel we've got so much to do. How can we possibly think about doing something else? But I think this is one of the things we need to think about first when we think about our home educating week and how we spend our time. It says in 1 Peter chapter 4, as each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. And now there are times and seasons. I've had 2 sets of twins, and when I've got newborn twins, I can barely get myself dressed, let alone thinking about serving in my local church. And I've very much found myself on the receiving end of other people's love and support. And again, perhaps if there's illness in the family or times of crisis, there might really not be very much that we can do. But as a general rule, I think we need to be seeking to serve in our churches. And again, standing in rank means as ladies, there are some things we're not permitted to do, one of which is taking a leadership role in the church or seeking to teach men. However, there are many, many ways that we can serve and use our gifting to help strengthen the Church of Christ. So just for example, myself, things that I do, I'm looking for things that kind of dovetail with the rest of what I do in the week. I play the piano on a Sunday because I'm there anyway, I may as well. And also, if I didn't play the piano, I probably would never play anymore, and it just keeps my skill alive. Another thing I do, I run a home educating group once a fortnight on a Thursday. So you can see, serving in a church, it's already put something into my week that the rest of my week has to work around. And it obviously is quite good for our family because it means the children have got something to do. But it means on that day we don't really get work done. And that's fine because I know we're serving the Lord on that day. So we stand in rank in our churches. We also stand in rank in our homes. So if you think about with relation to our husbands, and I realise there might be a few people here who are not married, or maybe a few who are married to unbelievers, but just talking to generally, probably most of us are, and there is a clear biblical structure. The husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and God created a helper fit for him, and we submit to our own husbands as to the Lord. And it is a relief to follow the biblical order of things. There's lots of stress about decision-making with home education, and I probably do most of the nitty-gritty of what we teach. But if I listen to Simon, very often he has something to say, and if I don't argue with it, or if I just take his advice, it makes the week run more smoothly. For example, if I am feeling quite stressed, if I feel like I've got too much to do, and I offload a little, Simon will very often say to me, just take a couple of days off. And I'm thinking, Did you hear anything I just said? I've got far too much to do, and you're suggesting I have a day off. But anyway, as a dutiful wife, I do as he says, take a couple of days off. And very often, I feel so much better after I've had a break. And I just need somebody to speak that to me. Another thing sometimes he does, Simon likes a nice tidy house. And I'm the sort of person, I just plan, I'd probably just do the same day forever and ever until I died. And he says, could we just take a day off just to, clear the decks? And rather than feeling perhaps aggrieved that my plans are being ruined, we do take a day off, clear the decks, and we always feel so much better afterwards. And it's just that thing of listening, taking advice to the person who God has put over us as our head. Okay, so we stand in rank in our churches, we stand in rank in relationship to our husbands, we stand in rank with relation to our children. And if you're here today, you've probably grasped the Titus 2 teaching, but I just want to say anyway, because to affirm you in what you're doing, because often churches are maybe a bit reticent to talk about these verses because they're so controversial. But it says in Titus 2, verse 3, older women are to teach what is good, to train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. And if we're at home caring for our own children, and I don't care if every single other lady in your church is out and they've handed their children over to the state, if we're at home caring for our own children, on that point we are absolutely standing in rank and we have God's approval. And we've understood that as mothers, we have a particular opportunity to evangelize our own children, and God has entrusted particular souls to our care. Okay, so standing in rank in our churches, in our homes. Now, there are some things to think about when we abandon our rank, when we take on a role we're not meant to be doing, and we don't do the role we should be doing. Number one, we lose God's approval because we cannot do it in faith, and without faith, it is impossible to please God. And it says in Matthew 15, Jesus is talking about the Pharisees and the scribes, and he says, in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men. And the Pharisees and scribes were teaching something they had absolutely no business to teach. And Jesus said their worship is in vain. It is worthless to him. They have lost God's approval. Secondly, to be occupied in something that is not our duty and to be assuming somebody else's role means we are neglecting our own task. So, if you think about David, in 2 Samuel 11, it says, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, but David remained at Jerusalem. David was the king. Where was he meant to be? He was meant to be out in battle, leading his men, and he stayed in Jerusalem. He abandoned his task, and what happened to him? He fell into adultery and murder. Thirdly, we lose, if we're out of rank, if we're doing things we're not meant to be doing, we lose God's protection. If you think about the account of Uzzah in 2 Samuel 6, David was bringing back the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, and God had laid down very strict instructions about how the Ark was meant to be transported. Firstly, it was meant to be carried by the Levites, and secondly, nobody was to touch it. And it says this, Uzzah put out his hand to the Ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. So it was a natural reaction. If something's about to fall, you catch it, don't you? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. So this is the thing. Uzzah was doing something he had absolutely no business doing. He was completely out of rank, and he lost God's protection. And thinking about standing in rank, and I just want to do it, put this in place in our week first. Sometimes there are some activities we're involved in that need to be axed so we can better give our attention to our children. And there are some things we might want to do that are just simply not for now. So a very simple one for me, I often think I'd like to have piano lessons, improve my skill, but I know there would be a cost, there'd be a financial cost involved, which probably isn't the best use of our resources at this time. And also, there would be a time cost because I'd have to spend a certain amount of time practicing. And really, that's not the most important thing for me to be doing at the moment. So maybe one day, maybe in heaven, I'll play beautifully, but it's not for now. Another thing I was involved in a couple of years ago, it was some outreach with another church, not my own. And we went to local parks, and it was myself, 2 gentlemen. So I guess I felt quite needed because there weren't any other ladies obviously available at the time. And we go and speak to young people about the gospel, and it was always very profitable. We had wonderful conversations, but it slowly dawned on me this thing was on a Wednesday, and it meant that neither of us could get to our church midweek group. And the other thing was, although I enjoyed what it was, I was always very nervous about it, and it threw me off key every Wednesday all day. And I was thinking, really, at this time in my life, is it right that for a whole day every week I can't give my children my best attention? And I realised sometimes things you want to do are dressed up as good deeds, aren't they? But the Lord doesn't need me, because once I stepped down, he rose up other ladies to do the job anyway. So sometimes we need to just remove things off our plate. And just talking about standing in rank, I just want to talk about our thought lives, because mothers often spend hours and hours needlessly stressing and stewing about other people's business, okay? And it says in Proverbs 14, verse 8, the wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way. And to be at home, washing up, ironing, if you iron, cleaning, teaching our children, and to be busying ourselves with somebody else's way is to break rank and neglect our children and our calling, because each of us has our own appointed work to do. If you think about it, in the account of the Amalekites, they were attacking Jerusalem, and there were 2 men, the Bible mentions, Joshua, who was in the valley fighting off the Amalekites. Moses was in the mountain praying. And we can't say that Joshua was prayerless, and we can't say that Moses lacked courage. What happened was they each had a different calling and a different duty to fulfill. So in the same way, when we're sitting at home thinking, why aren't they doing that? Or why are they doing it wrong? Or we're completely out of rank to be thinking these things. We need to focus on our own task. And I'm talking about myself, by the way. God does not hold us accountable for another man's work. In the parable of the dishonest manager in Luke 16, the rich man has a manager, and he says to his manager, give me an account of your work. One day we'll stand before the King of Kings, and he will ask us for an account of what we have done, not what our friends have done, not what our husbands have done, not what our enemies have done, but what we have done of our own work. Okay, so my first point, we stand in rank. This is my second point. Just return to my Bible. Matthew 25. And this is the point, we steward our resources, okay? So I'm just going to read you the parable of the talents. Let's get a drink. Okay, so, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents here, I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents here, I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over a much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I know you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. But the master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You know that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. Okay? And then the passage continues. And I think when we think about home education, very often we come to the table and we place conditions on God, and we say, I could only home educate if I had a big house, a PhD, lots of money, more children, fewer children, a garden, a church that supports me, supportive family members. And we place conditions on God, and it is no wonder that we are so quick to become overwhelmed. But I think the biblical answer is to look at what God has put in our hand and to steward it wisely. Now, a couple of years ago in our history curriculum, we learned about Leonardo da Vinci, who obviously painted the Mona Lisa. And I never knew this, but apparently he used to carry this, he loved this painting, he used to carry it on him somewhere, and he was continually taking it out, touching it up. And this painting was in perpetual progress. And when I think about our home schools, I think they're a bit like our Mona Lisas. Now, they might not feel like a Mona Lisa. You might feel like you've got a blank canvas, or you've made a mess over here, you started in the wrong place. But that's all right, because paint just covers things up. So with our Mona Lisas, we carry them next to our heart, and we are never done improving. And I know a few ladies here have been home educating a little longer than me, and I'm sure you'd agree, there are always areas to tighten up. There's always a way of improving what we're doing. And the point is, this is what I think, you just take one thing, and you work on that thing. You think, how can I steward this thing better for God's glory? And rather than becoming overwhelmed, trying to change everything at once, you just take one thing. So let's begin. What has God put in our hand? So he's given us our homes, possibly gardens, maybe friends, supportive family members, skills, money, groups, opportunities, energy levels. The list goes on. And I just want to talk about a few, and maybe just think of a few practical ways that we can perhaps better steward some of the resources God has given us. So let's begin with the obvious one, which is money. Some of us might feel like we really can't spend any money on our homeschools. That's fine. It can be done on a shoestring. Some of us might have a little bit of money. And I think often as Christians, we might get the feeling that it's not right to spend our money on our own families, or we might feel a bit guilty about it. And because in this country, education is often supposedly free, we might kind of not really be used to spending money on education. But William Willard, who was a Puritan, said this: riches are consistent with godliness. The more a man has, the more advantage he has to do with it. So our money has been given to us for our good. If we have a little bit of money we can spend on our children or on resources, it is absolutely good and right to do our children our best with what we have. Okay? And just as a very practical aside, we don't, there's a lot we can do in our week. We don't want to spend a lot of time wasting our hours on areas of chaos. So if you're just starting out, and maybe you're a younger mum or even older one maybe, and you don't really have a system for managing your money, can I just encourage you to put one in place so you don't spend lots of time worrying about how much you have to spend on things. So in our house, I manage the money, and I just use a system called You Need a Budget, and at the start of the month, I allocate our money to different categories, and then once a week, I sort of just tot everything up. And really, it's such a relief, this, because I never really worry about what we have or don't have. If we've got it, I spend it. If we don't, we don't. And it's fine. It's a bit of my life that just runs quite smoothly. And if it doesn't run smoothly in yours, maybe it's just time just to get something in place so that you're freed up to do other things with your time. Right, our homes. So I've got 7 children. I think we had 7 under 8 or 9 at one point. We're probably not going to have a show home. I've been promised 49 grandchildren, so I don't know if I'll even get show home in the end. However, I do recognise that we work better from order than from chaos. When I had 3 under 2, my first 3 under 2, I realised I needed help. So I just very practically, I looked around my church for a mum who had a tidy home, slightly older children than me, and I just grilled her on everything. How often do you change your sheets? How do you clean the toilet? Do you do washing every day? Are your clothes all folded? You know, everything. And very graciously, she was sort of like the older mum teaching me. And I learned two things from her. And obviously, I didn't take her system and impose it on my house, but I learned two general principles. One is that everything has a place. And it's quite easy for clutter just to fill our homes. And I've just learned, I'm not very sentimental about crafts. Sorry to my children. Take a picture, wait till they're not around in it. And then equally, we don't like hang on to things we don't need as much as we can. We just try and pass it on, get it out of our house. So we've got that system for sort of decluttering. Every now and again, like I say, Simon likes to get rid of everything we have. So we have a declutter day, and it does really help us. And the other thing my friend had was a system for getting it done, and she used to break it up across the week. And depending on the age of my children, I've sort of had a few different systems. And at the moment, I think I've got a policy that if you're bigger than the Hoover, you can use the Hoover. So my younger two are 5, they can both use the Hoover. And so basically on a Friday, I've worked out, we sort of finish work a little bit early, and I've worked out in about 2 hours, I can basically Hoover from top to bottom, mop, clean 2 bathrooms, poke around at the cobwebs. And it is a team sport. We all get involved. Everybody can get a duster and clean something. Now, when I had younger children, I'd probably break it up through the week a bit more, just try and accomplish one task a day. And one thing, again, a practical thing, I came across that might help some of you, but there's a system called Fly Lady, and Fly Lady it's called. You can download the app on your phone, and I sometimes use it and sometimes sort of abandon it. But basically, it breaks your home down into about 5 zones, and each week you work on one zone. So if you've got maybe the kitchen zone, if you've got 10 minutes, that's just enough time to clean a drawer or clear an area of the fridge. And if you don't get it done, it doesn't matter, because 5 weeks later you'll get back to it again and give it another go. So that's just a practical thing. You know, if the reason you're feeling overwhelmed in your home is because of, you know, the state of the home, then that's one thing we could be working on. And like I said, we're not going to have show homes, I don't think, if we're doing our jobs. But it doesn't need to be complete chaos. And we do work better if we know where the pencils are and we have a ruler at the start of the day, we can find our books. Okay, money, homes, garden. Again, not everybody has a garden, but if we've got a garden, it's been given to us to steward wisely for God's glory. And some people are quite into gardening. Simon's good at gardening. But even if we're not, we want our garden to be safe for our children to play in. We don't want glass in it. We don't want rubbish in the garden. And again, it's a little thing, but if we can keep this bit of our life under control, if we can steward it wisely, it means our children can go outside and play, and their friends can as well. Right, number 4, time. And I think this is the one we probably might feel the most overwhelmed by. And there's such a temptation to say, as a home educating mother, I do not have enough time. Now, I think that to continually be saying that all the time is actually a slander on the nature of God, because God created the world in 6 24-hour days, and he also set us the work to do. And to say that we've been given too much to do for the time God allotted is to make him out to be a hard master, okay? And it doesn't say anything about our king. Perhaps we need to have the confidence to say, this is not a right use of my time. Now, the key to stewarding time is to have a plan for how we're going to use it. And I think this, again, is biblical. If you look in Proverbs chapter 6, talking about the ant, it says she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. So you can see there's a plan. Even the ant has a plan. Parts of the year she prepares her bread, and parts of the year she gathers her food. And in the same way, it's good to have a plan for our time. So I've read about systems where they plan to 15 minutes, which would just be a disaster in my house, because anything could happen in 15 minutes. I just work in blocks of an hour. In the morning, so I have an hour with the twins and when we do devotions, an hour with my older girls, an hour with my boys, maybe a bit of time for science. And that just works quite well for us. And stewarding time means I also take time out to plan my time. So probably in the normal sort of school holidays, I normally spend a day just thinking about how I'm going to manage my term. I like to put it on paper, because if it doesn't even fit on paper, it's not going to work in real life. And then once the sort of term starts, some things don't make it anyway and they quickly fall off the list. But at least I've had a plan, and that's the best way of stewarding the time God has given me. Right, energy levels. I'm a morning person. I don't like to do anything useful after 7 o'clock in the evening. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't plan anything. I don't clean. When I get to 7 o'clock in the evening, it's my time to recharge. I write and I read, and that's basically it. So to do that, it means I need to be efficient when I have the most energy. So for that reason, we tend to do mastery subjects in the morning. I've got a big whiteboard on my wall, and if anything comes up that I think I need to have prepared for the next day, maybe something's lost or needs buying or something, I just write it on the whiteboard, and then once I've had a break at the end of the day, I just tack everything off so that I have that free time in the evening for myself. Some people are like night owls and have to work a different way to me. How do we steward our resources? Well, the answer is we steward with wisdom. And we know where to go for wisdom, because in James chapter 1, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. And there's a proverb, chapter 24, verse 5, and it says, a wise man is full of strength, and a man of knowledge enhances his might. And this is the difference between a wise man and a strong man, okay? A strong man can carry a sack of coal home to his family on his shoulders every day to keep his family warm. But a wise man invents a simple machine to carry many sacks of coal in one journey. He uses far less effort, and thanks to his wisdom, he frees up his time to apply himself to another task. Okay, so when we're praying for wisdom, we're praying God will show us how to steward the resources he's given us to the best of our ability so that we're freed up to apply ourselves to something else. Okay, so, excuse me. So, we've done standing in rank, stewarding our resources, and the third S. I wonder if anybody here has ever felt, ever so slightly, irritated with their children. I've read about this. Perhaps we found ourselves hissing at our children, or dare I even say, raising our voices at our children. Okay, I talk about what I know, okay? Now, the reason most of us feel overwhelmed is far less to do with how the day pans out and far more to do with how we respond to it. So this is our third S. This is the will of God, your sanctification. And in our catechism in the morning, we learned that sanctification is God making sinners holy and heart in conduct. And if we love Christ, then at some point we will have prayed that he will make us more like him. And perhaps we imagine something a little more glamorous than managing a naughty toddler after an all-nighter with the baby, 2 babies in my case. And if we've ever asked God to make us, Christ to make us more like him, we do not get to comment on the means that he uses to achieve this. And the Lord purifies and refines his people through the ordinary means of the work he has given us to do and the people he puts in our lives. And these very much include our children. Now, home education, we've got our children with us all the time, and it means we very quickly become very well acquainted with our sin. And this is actually a really good thing. Now, the nature of home education is that most of it takes place when nobody's watching us, but God is watching us. And if our children were in school and their teacher dealt with them the same way that we deal with them, how would we feel? Would we feel upset? Okay? Now we need to make it we need to make the business of killing sin our daily practice. The Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, made killing sin his daily practice. He writes, I discipline my body and keep it under control. Now, if the apostle said how hard he had worked to kill sin, then how much more do we need to as home educating mothers? And the fact that we want to kill sin is good because it is is evidence of the reality of our faith. Okay, so when I started out, I realized very quickly I needed some help with this. So I went to the greats. John Owen died 350 years ago, and he wrote some amazing stuff about how to battle with sin in our lives. So I've just pulled a few little things out because I think this is important for us as mothers, okay? So firstly, fairly obviously, we need to be true believers. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you. Okay. Oops. My page is in the wrong order. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but while we were all weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. By one man's disobedience, all people... Sorry, I'm completely in the wrong place. No, I'm missing these. Go back again. Okay, so we need to be Christians. Number 2, we seek to obey God in all areas. God looks at the whole picture. So if you're struggling with worry, anxiety, sinful reactions to our children or to our husbands, but we're negligent over other duties such as church attendance or personal prayer and Bible reading, then we're not going to gain victory over the troubling sin. And it says in Isaiah, talking about Israel, they seek me daily and delight to know my ways. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. But God rejected their fasting and their prayer because it was the only duty that they observed. They were seeking their own pleasure, oppressing their workers, prideful. We cannot be hypocrites. If we're deliberately pursuing sin in one area, then God will not help us in the one area that we bring to him. Okay, next thing. We need to think about our motive for killing sin. Why do we care about the way we react to our children? Is it because we're embarrassed? Okay, we want to raise our children perfectly because we want other people to think we're good parents. That's not the right reason to want to kill sin in our lives. Perhaps we fight sin because of the legal consequences, so we reap what we sow. If we're in a habit of blowing our top at our children, one outworking of this is that everyone who is living on it with us will feel as though they're treading on eggshells, and they will become afraid of us. But we live under grace. The reason we don't want to deal with our own children in anger is because anger is sinful and it dishonors God, and he never deals with his own children in anger. And Joseph said, when he was tempted by Potiphar's wife, his first concern was that he would be sinning against God. He said, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So when we're struggling with the sin in our own lives, our primary motive needs to be because we do not want to dishonor the God who saved us. Fourthly, we don't shake hands with our sin or speak peace to our sin. Sin is what broke our peace with God in the first place, and our peace with God must begin with a war against sin. So how often do we comfort ourselves when we sin against our children or our husbands? We say, it is only a little one. Everyone does it, which is true, okay? They deserved it. It was the final straw. So often in Christendom, we believers are guilty of speaking peace to our sin. And people often say things like, don't worry, even King David committed adultery and murder, even Peter denied Christ. But God did not record these events so that we would find an excuse that our sin is not so bad after all. And Thomas Brooks, who was a Puritan, said, it never entered into the heart of God to record his children's sin that others might be encouraged to sin, but that others might look to themselves and hang the faster upon the skirts of Christ. After sinning with Bathsheba, David writes, my sin is ever before me. You see, these saints, they never really got over their sin, and we're being flippant when we use it as an excuse to sin ourselves. David writes, my sin is ever before me. Against you and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Purge me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. With Peter, he denied Christ 3 times. And Clement, who was an early church father, he wrote that Peter would weep whenever he heard a cock crow because it reminded him of his deep sorrow at denying Christ. So his sin, it stayed with him for the rest of his life. These saints fall dreadfully, but they rise by repentance. And in the same way, when we sin, we need to be sure to know true repentance. And we remind ourselves of the gospel. We remind ourselves what God's word says. David wrote, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. By one man's disobedience, all men were made sinful, but by one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. And then finally, we watch ourselves. Jesus says to his disciples in Luke 21, "Watch yourselves." We need to always be watching ourselves, checking our hearts, and guarding our hearts. And this means, for example, we think about the time when we're most likely to stumble. It might be a time in the day. I know when I get to 5, 6, 7 o'clock, I'm starting to get a little bit crabby. Certain times of the month, they come around every month, and it's quite easy to react badly at those times. Perhaps even a few days after a baby is born, there's the high, isn't there? And there's the low. And the thing I've learned after several decades of disasters, perhaps I might say, is the best thing to do is just to keep quiet. If we're not feeling that great, if we feel like everything we say is going to be tearing people down, the best thing to do is just not to speak, just to say what we have to say and wait till we get to bed. And there's a proverb, Proverb 17, it says, "Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent." So there you go. If we don't say anything, people will think we're wise and intelligent. So it is win-win. Okay, we need to guard ourselves against people we might be tempted to gossip with and just general chaos and disorder, or maybe struggling with the sin of unforgiveness and bitterness. Now, the fact that we are sinful women does not preclude us from home education. If we waited until we were perfect before we started serving God, we would never get anything done. But I want to talk about this because when we think about Christian home education, we must take into account the spiritual walk of the mother. And a large part of the balance of our homeschool depends on the mother's walk with the Lord, and we're perhaps too quick to brush under the carpet our own sinful behaviours and attitudes, and too slow to call on Christ for forgiveness and help as we seek to put to death our sin. It says in Lamentations, "But the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning, great is your faithfulness." Finally, it is good to grow in the knowledge of our own sinfulness and need of the grace of God, since it reminds us of our children's need for Christ and our complete inability to save them, however well run our homeschools and however tidy our homes. And in the Valley of Vision, which is a book of Puritan prayer, it says this: "To the eye of reason, everything respecting the conversion of others is as dark as midnight, but thou can accomplish great things. The cause is thine, and it is to thy glory that men shall be saved." So let's pray. Father God, I really want to thank you for each of these ladies here today who have chosen to make their primary task serving you by raising their own children in you. And we do pray for each of our children, Lord. I pray for my 7 and the many more represented here today, that in your great mercy, you might convict them and convert them and translate them from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. And Lord, we do pray that as the next generation is raised in you, we might see Whitfields and Wilberforces and grown children standing in the gates in the place of government. And we do pray we'll reap a harvest. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, I've just got a few minutes if anybody has any questions. It's about 10 minutes. Sorry, I should have said this at the beginning. Hi. Single parent. Thank you for your question. Yeah, thank you for your question. A single parent. I always feel like I've got to be very careful not to talk about things I don't know so well, but I have noticed single parents are often so resourceful, and I really think There's such a room for God to help you, yeah, and to supply by other means. And maybe it's partly asking God to open your eyes to those around you who are in your life, maybe in your church, and the ways he showed help. But I absolutely think you can still home educate, 100%. And maybe the task is harder, but our God is great, isn't he? And maybe you'll grow closer to him than some of us ever will because he's your husband. Yeah. And maybe if there are any other mums here who might speak to you afterwards, then yeah. Anything else? Hi. Yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah, sure. So it's a question about how to balance sort of older children. We've got all the younger children. So that's really what I've been doing until about a year ago. I've always had little children. And it's not a perfect art. I don't think we can think it's always going to run perfectly every day. And don't think that, because then you might just continually feel disappointed, okay? But there are some things you can do. So firstly, I think it's really helpful to get into a routine. Little children, sort of young ones, really thrive on routine. So nap times, I keep them going as long as I possibly can. And I try to do work that I really can't be distracted by during nap times, like maths perhaps. One thing is quite helpful is to start off the day with your little children. I don't know how old they are, but if you can give a bit of time to, say, a 1 or 2 year old at the start of the day, it seems to kind of keep them going a little bit longer. Sorry, what I was going to say. Also, if you've got, I've realised some subjects are quite conducive to teaching younger children as well. So, for example, our history curriculum, we're using Mystery of History, and there are some printout pages which are pictures. So if they're kind of in the 2, 3, 4 bracket, my guys were always really happy to sit in colour and listen to the stories. And the other thing they all like, even very little ones, is memorization. So we memorize poems, and even from the age of kind of 2 or 3, they're all very happy to join in. But I think you have to do it at the same time every day, so they all know we come together then. And the other thing is we do have to train our younger children that sometimes we can't be there. So sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes I just have to move them out of the way and just tell them to sit on the stairs till I can get to them. And so, yeah, it's not a perfect art, but I do think there are things you can do about it. And also, I think God teaches us patience through this. It's a very important time, which I don't regret having gone through, because I probably learned a lot of patience through trying to teach the older ones and manage the younger ones as well. Anybody else? Okay. Yeah, hi. Yeah, okay. Well, the one I found most helpful in teaching home educate in the academic side of things was probably The Well-Trained Mind. I mean, it's a big book, but even if you just read the first 2 or 3 chapters, I found that really helpful. And there's a book called The Core by Lee Bortins that I think Classical Conversations might well have on their table. When it comes to sort of more our spiritual walk, one thing I've been reading through for a year, which I think is brilliant, is William Gurnall's book, The Christian in Complete Armour. And there's also another book by Jeremiah Burroughs called something, The Divine Art of Contentment. They're quite little books. They're quite meaty, hard books to read. But even if you can read a paragraph, it is really food for what you're doing. So those are books I've really enjoyed. Is there anybody else? Sorry. Hey. Yeah, how do I make them memorize? Yeah, like in our daily Bible reading. Yeah, so we do, we use a little catechism. Simon actually does it. Do you want to say something? What's it called again? I can't remember.
Well, it's the Baptist catechism.
Yeah. We use a catechism with our children. It's very simple. So the first question is very easy to remember. Who made me? Yeah, you know, who made me? God made me. Why did God make me? For his own glory. What else did God make? God made all things, okay? So we do that. And even a 1 or 2 year old can get the patter. They don't understand it, but this is the thing with the age ranges. When they're very young, they memorize stuff really, really well, and it's such a good time to get them to memorize things. And later on, the understanding comes. So we just do it at the same time every day. We all sit down together, every child, and they know that. And even the ones that don't understand, it's short. And if you repeat it every day, they learn it better than me. The little ones are much better at learning than I am. Is that it? Is there another one somewhere? Hey, hi. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, sorry. What does my day look like on a day-to-day basis? Okay. Well, firstly, we chose to go the classical education route, which is quite an intense route. And I've got 7 children. And to do classical education well, you have to spend a lot of time on it. So I don't really want to put you off. I'm just saying, because I've got a lot of children and because this is the route we're doing. So we begin at 8, because like I said, I'm a morning person. Simon does a catechism. And then basically I work with the twins till 9, and they're done. Then I spend an hour with my girls. We do Latin, grammar, and sort of maths. An hour with my boys. And then there's a bit of time for science, then lunch. We don't, I feel like our day is quite full, but I probably get 3.5 days done a week. So I don't want to kind of scare people. And then after lunch, we probably work for about an hour and a half on things like history and writing. But they're not all involved all the time. It's just some of the children. So, yeah. So we probably work 3.5 days a week. That's realistically what we get done. Yeah.
What do your children do when you're teaching?
Yeah. Yeah, so in the morning, they're sort of old enough, most of them now, to get on with maths. And I know ideally I'd sit down with each of them, teach them properly, but it's just not practical with 7 of them. I can't teach 7 of them maths. So they can mostly get on with it. And then in their kind of allocated hour, once we've done like the grammar or whatever we're doing, if I've got a bit of time left, they bring me any questions they can't do. And I just think, I can only do what I can do. I've only got that hour to work with them. It's very tempting to give all your time to one child, particularly the one maybe who's struggling a bit more, but I think that steals from other children. So that's why I've got it written down beforehand. That's how much time I can spend. If we can't get it done, we'll just work on it tomorrow. And they're still learning. And again, God put them in my family in the knowledge I'd have 7 children close in age. So I just think I can only do what I can do and do it to the best of my ability. So, hi. I'm done, yeah. Okay, after 7 o'clock. Okay, so everything hangs at 7 o'clock because the twins go to bed. They're my 5-year-olds. They're out of my hair in a lovely way. So anyway, I think I just sort of, in a way, I'm getting to 7 o'clock. I put them in bed. And the older ones, they just occupy themselves, really. And there's kind of meant to be a thing that every half an hour the next child goes to bed. And we're getting a bit more relaxed in our old age. So probably began very strict. And it's probably better to be younger in my family. Sorry, Daniel. That's at the back. He's always telling me that, I didn't do that for him. So anyway, we have to give him something to complain about when he's older. So yeah, after 7 o'clock, I just, if they come and talk to me, I don't want to jump down their throats. I just say really politely, I'm really sorry, Mummy can't talk at the moment. And I'm just honest, I'm very sorry. So everything at the moment is after the conference. Could we talk about it after the conference? Monday, I'm going to have a great day with my children. So I don't snap at them. I try not to snap. I'm really sorry. I just can't think at the moment. And they look after themselves, don't they?
Yeah,
you want to add in?
After all the years that we've home educated them, we do find with the older ones, now they can take care of themselves. You've given them so much time when they're younger. Now, our oldest is only 12, coming 13. They can each manage most things for themselves, which is one of the great benefits of home education. You've given them so much when they're younger. By the time they get to 8, 9, 10, that they can't do everything, but they can do a lot of things. And even when it comes to their own work, they're very self-motivated when you can't put that time into teaching them. They will do a lot of their own research, and they'll come back with questions, but you will find that children are very good in a lot of different subjects at learning for themselves, which is one of the blessings of home education. Maybe we should stop here because it's time for lunch and to pick up the children. But if you have further questions, I know a lot of you might be familiar with our Facebook page leading them out, or the website leading them out, and a lot of people have found that helpful. And so a lot of the questions you may have in your mind, I think you've blogged and written about a lot of them, so you might be able to go there, or even just send a Facebook message to Jess, and we'll be able to correspond, happy to correspond with you, or come to us after this talk. So we're gonna finish this session. It's lunchtime, and so I think we need to begin to pick up our children.
Thank you.